All right, we're very happy to have as one of our invited speakers, Christof Paar, who will tell us about the yin and yang sides of embedded security.
Dan, thank you very much, and thanks to all organizers for the invitation. It's the first time in India, and I'm really enjoying it. Yeah, so what I maybe before we start, a few words about acknowledgement. You know, if German professors do great things, it's normally the PhD students, right? So that's a list of PhD student and postdoc who did most of the work that I'm going to present here. So what I'm going to do really, what I really wanted to do is I wanted to talk about a few case studies that we did over the last few years in the area of embedded security. So this is Yin 1, 2, and Yang 1, 2. And then I was looking for a catchy title or a catchy theme so that I can pretend as though this is some things that really belong together, which they don't. And as I was going through Wikipedia, I encountered this whole yin-yang thing, and I think it's very interesting, and that's why I used it as a title, because I think this is a super useful concept. But before I go into this catchy yin-yang thing, I first want to talk a little bit about embedded security per se, and maybe it's important. Maybe a big question is, who cares about embedded security? That's probably a good question, you know, as opposed to maybe internet or cloud type of security. And what I really like is this pie diagram, or the circle, which is going to become a pie diagram. What are the estimates? How many CPUs are actually, all the CPUs that are being sold, are actually end up in laptops, PC workstations, and so forth? Any ideas? What's the percentage? 10. What's it? 10%. It's pretty good. It's 2%. Okay? So out of 100 CPUs built, 98 end up in cars, refrigerators, smartphones, and 2% end up in computers, you know, traditional computers, which is impressive, I think. And that's probably, it's really hard to get hard numbers on that, and that's probably even an underestimate here, this 2%. This 98 is probably an underestimate. So the next question is, maybe we believe Christof. That might roughly be accurate. The next big question is here in the lower corner. What about security? Are there any security issues? You know, do refrigerators have security issues? Most refrigerators nowadays have a CPU built in. And rather than having some abstract concept, I want to give you a few examples, rather modern examples of embedded systems, embedded devices that have security issues. If you look at the consumer multimedia entertainment markets, there are two killer applications at the moment. Well, particularly in North America, but you know, slowly swapping over to the rest of the world. This is the iTunes system by Apple and Amazon's Kindle ebook reader. Both of them are really high-tech products, but and there's a lot of stuff involved outside security, yet DRM, digital rights management, is one of the cornerstones of the system. Without strong DRM, that would be much, much harder to sell that. So again, we look at, you know, almost by now everyday consumer devices. Security is not some kind of small niche aspect. It's very important. A different application, which is maybe even more surprising, is telemedicine. What you see here is a hearing aid, but there are even more extreme examples, such as medical implants. The people such as Kevin Fu from the University of Massachusetts at Amherst, what they started to do over the last 3 years or so, they started hacking into medical implants. I mean, literally into pacemakers, you know, that you wear under your skin, inside your body. It turned out either the password protected, you know, with the password being 0000, or more commonly, they're not protected at all. So it means once you get close enough to a person, you can start reprogramming the pacemaker, right? So this is a very scary thing. One aspect I'm going to talk about is car-to-car communications. I don't want to address it at this moment. Another issue which I'm also going to address is more and more countries, and it's really like a worldwide development, is they're moving away from traditional plastic and paper ID cards. Now they're introducing electronic ID cards. Again, there's almost, by definition, you have built in a big security problem. You don't want people such as Al-Qaeda starting to issue fake passports just by reprogramming some chip. So what you see here are four examples which I think are very, very timely, and some of them are very surprising. You would think this has nothing to do with crypto, and what I'm claiming, they have a lot to do with crypto. So now, what type of research is needed? And if you look in particular at the chess community, which is this strange workshop, cryptographic hardware and embedded system, there's essentially two strands of research, and we talk about that either efficient implementation or secure implementation. If you look at it from an alternative viewpoint, you can look at yin and yang, and this is a definition from Wikipedia, that's how I do research. The concept of yin-yang is used to describe how polar opposites or seemingly contrary forces are interconnected and interdependent in the natural world, and how they give rise to each other in turn. So if we take this as our belief or a belief system or a system of explaining things, you can also say we have a constructive side in embedded security and a destructive side. So, and I think both are very, very important. And towards the end, actually, I want to readdress yin and yang again. But what I'm going to do now, I want to give you case studies of, pretty recent research, both dealing with yin and yang in the context of embedded security. So first, let's look at cars and embedded security, or cars and crypto, as you will see in a second. So, but first, let's watch a movie. So that's an actual intersection in Kentucky. So you're going to see the same crash again from the opposite angle. So it's the same crash, and there's nothing new except that it's fun to watch again. So, okay. That's kind of interesting, right? But how is it related to IndoCrypt? Let's go back. Some of the big problems, at least in the US and Europe, are people dying in cars, right? In the US, 33,000 people die annually in car accidents, deadly. If you relate that to the people died in the September 11 attack, this number is like factor 10, right, bigger per year. And we don't start wars because of that, right? So we don't start wars against Ford or GM. Europe, you end up with the same number as some similar population. If you look at the injuries and you look at the cost to the economy, it's absurd. It's billions of dollars and euros that are due to car accidents. So driving cars is pretty dangerous, at least in Europe and the US. What are the causes? Rarely is that the brake system doesn't work. It's rarely that the steering wheel doesn't work. It's normally people fiddling around with their cell phone, right? They're not watching the road and they bang it against each other. So what can we do about it? What the car community has been doing essentially the last 40 years, since the 1960s, they start to improving cars in terms of mechanical system or active mechanical systems, such as most prominent example is the seat belt, airbags, anti-blocking system, and so forth. It's a huge success. They estimate without these systems, you would have about 5 times as many deadly car accidents per year. So this is a great success. The problem is you can't make it much better, right? There isn't much more you can add in terms of passive security to cars, in terms of mechanical security. So what the big car markets, that means Europe, North America, and Asia, are betting on is electronic driver assistance. What is this idea? Idea is very simple. Every car driving on the road is sending out something very simple. It's GPS coordinates, nothing else, right? Just GPS coordinates. I'm here at this moment in time. Why do we do that? Well, we greatly improve safety, as we've seen. The other positive aspect is improved traffic management. And if you live in a big city in India, you know what I'm talking about, right? Congestion. It's the same, of course, in Europe and in North America. I was in Toronto 6 months ago, and it took me 4.5 hours to get from Toronto to Waterloo, which is 90 kilometers. So, you're not alone here in Chennai, right, with traffic. So what I'm saying here is it's great to have traffic that's more efficient, right, for various reasons, right? Less dead people on the road and less congestion, less global warming and stuff. So if you look at this network characteristic from kind of a computer science point of view, we have small messages. Why small? Again, it's only, essentially the X and Y coordinate on planet Earth, right? So this is about 100 bytes. It's not very frequent. The car people, they call that the heartbeat messages. You know, every 100 milliseconds, 10 times per second, that these are my coordinates, these are my coordinates, these are my coordinates. It's extremely ad hoc, so if you're in ad hoc network research, this is cool because this is really ad hoc. You know, often they talk about Wi-Fi as being a sensor networks. The truth is it's not very dynamic. This is super dynamic, right? You have cars entering and leaving your communication zone, your communication radius all the time. But, and now it's getting more towards the crypto problem, a high number of incoming messages. So they estimate between 1,000 and 2,000 incoming messages per second, you know, depending on your congestion system. So again, how is it related to IndoCrypt? Well, there's an IEEE standard. There's an existing standard for the US, a P1609 standard, which is essentially a version of the Wi-Fi standard. And there's an upcoming standard in Europe. Both standards require that every message must be authenticated. And how do they do that? Well, the standard is what you should really do is use elliptic curves, right? And I'm really glad that Tanya was here yesterday afternoon and gave the tutorial on elliptic curves, because people working at Ford and Tara have at some point to start putting elliptic curve in cars. So we've seen that probably. So this is an elliptic curve. So this is an elliptic curve in 60 seconds. So you have a point on the curve, and what you end up doing in your car, you know, you have to double the point and triple the point and do that many, many, many times, and you end up with your final point, if you wish, Q, and you do S of these skips or jumps. And then, as Tanya showed us yesterday, you have a public key and a private key. Tanya and Dan, you got that? Are you with me here? Or was it too fast? Okay, so we all know that, of course. So, and then we end up having a discrete logarithm problem, and now the question is, it's becoming more and more an engineering problem, namely, if you want to implement that, and again, we have to implement 1,000 or 2,000 digital signatures per second, we have to look ultimately at this group operation. Again, Tanya had an excellent introduction to that. Now, in concrete terms, if you want to do a one-point addition, you know, P plus T in Jacobian coordinates, you have to evaluate this set of formulas. And as Tanya said, there are a lot of different versions of group addition formulas. But it's roughly speaking, you have to do about a dozen multiplications for 1 point addition. But then one multiplication is not just a plain old multiplication, but in the US standards, they call for 256-bit ECC, which I think is an overkill, but that's a different story. So, and this is equivalent to about 3,500 16-bit multiplication, which you can do on a typical DSP processor, for instance. So now you might say 3,500 multiplication is not that bad. It's not that bad, but this is only one jump, you know, one skip, one group operation on the elliptic curves. You have to do many, 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 many of those, you know, hundreds of those for one digital signature, and then we need 1,000 of these signatures. So the question is, how do we do that? And that was the status quo when the US car industry approached us a few years ago and said, well, we have to do 1,000 signatures with commodity hardware. And the first reaction was that, why don't you buy one of those crypto accelerators you get for servers? Right? For instance, the company Rainbow in the US built, and I said, well, the problem is the crypto accelerators, they're like $2,000. You know, and if you look at cheap cars, such as the Tara Tiny, which is $5,000 or 5,000 euros, you don't want to spend $1,000 on the crypto, right, for one really tiny function in the car. So really the question was, how can we provide cheap elliptic curve at high speed? And then, long story made short, we developed this real-time signature engine, and the requirements was 256-bit ECC, as we saw before. If you translate that, and this is just a very rough operation count in terms of integer multiplication, 1,000 signatures per second translates into something 1 billion 16-bit multiplication. When we did that a few years ago, if you use off-the-shelf, high-end Texas Instruments DSP, you needed about 10 DSPs running in parallel, 10 DSPs, which is a lot of money. I think just the sheer cost of the DSPs was something like $1,000 at that time, so that was not acceptable. So what Tim Gunezo really came up with, he found that commercial FPGAs, I'm going to talk more about FPGAs later on, have DSP blocks. That means small blocks that do addition and multiplication, and they don't have one on board, but even small FPGAs have a few dozen, like 56 or 48, 56 or 64 of these accumulate and multiply units on board. But people in the crypto world hadn't really looked at that, how to use them, and it's definitely not trivial to do that. But Tim got it running. So what we are able to do now is we can do 256 modular multiplication in 63 cycles, which is rather quick. And as a final result, you can take a low-cost FPGA, off-the-shelf FPGA, which is in the €10, $10 range roughly. And with this low-cost FPGA, we can do 1,500 signatures, and which is very competitive. It's very interesting. If you use the high-end FPGAs, which are admittedly very expensive, you can do tens of thousands of signatures. And again, the main aspect is not that we can do 1,500 signatures per second, but we can do 1,500 signatures on a device that's a few dollars, right? And this is, people really like that, so we sold, this got commercialized to a spin-off company. We sold a few hundred, I think probably by now more than 1,000 units. These are all field trials, so this is not production ready, so this is high volume ready. So this is used in field trials, and about 1,000 both cars and roadside units in the US that use that. So that was a good aspect. Okay, so this was the Yin 1, the first constructive way of using crypto in embedded security. And as you just saw, this is extremely high performance and low cost. What we now want to do is low cost and low performance, right? So we want to really go at the other end of the performance spectrum, right? It doesn't matter how fast it is, but just make it really, really cheap. I heard the first time about this problem. I've been doing embedded crypto since '95, but this first time, this problem statement, we want to have crypto for really cheap, as in less than 1 cent, was at CHES 2002 in Silicon Valley, and Sanya Sarma, who was the, I think, CTO or head of the Auto ID Labs, which is an MIT spin-off, and he gave this great talk on RFID, and I'd never heard about RFID before at this point, and he said, we need your help, addressing 200 CHES attendees, and said, towards his last slide, he said, we have no idea how to do really cheap crypto. What I can tell you, we cannot give you more than 2,000 gates, and this has to become kind of a magic number in this lightweight crypto community, and how to build strong security for 2,000 gates. Another application besides RFID, or maybe in conjunction with RFID, you see here, this is anti-counterfeiting, how to prevent people in certain countries to build cheap counterfeits. What you see here are printer cartridges, which are, roughly the business model of the printer industry is they sell hardware, printer hardware at cost or below cost, and then they make money out of selling cartridges, for $39. That's ridiculous, right? For piece of plastic with some toner in, right? But they make a ton of money out of that. And what you see here is another application where this is a knockoff Sony company, which is a one-to-one knockoff of an original Sony. Both of that, industry would like to prevent. So how do we do that? This is not a hard problem in cryptographic terms, right? This is an entity authentication, or sometimes called identification problem. Can both be fixed with cryptography. We see that on the next slide. The question is, what are the details? And now let's look actually at a detail, and I think I saw this example first with Ross Anderson 10 years ago. He gave a talk at CHES in Paris where there was a very similar example. And this has become reality. Actually, we worked on this problem in the meantime. So a similar problem to this printer cartridge problem is with cell phones. These cell phones have really become a commodity product, right? You get a cheap cell phone in Europe for $50, or so brand new, original Nokia, blah, blah, blah. If you replace the battery, you still pay 10 or 15 euros for the battery. So again, similar to printer cartridges, Nokia makes much more money selling the battery than selling the cell phone, right? This is a much simpler product. So now, of course, other people would also like to sell you batteries for 5 euros or $5 or 300 rupees, right? So now Nokia has a high incentive to make sure only original batteries work. So how can we do that? Well, you put a small crypto algorithm both in the firmware here and in a hardware chip on the battery. I denote that by E with the key K, so that's a symmetric setup. Battery and cell phone share the same key. And then we run a challenge response protocol. Everybody's seen that, or almost everybody's seen that in this room here. So the cell phone sends a random challenge to this chip located on the battery. The battery encrypts, sends the encrypted value Y back, and now the phone can verify. What does the phone do? The phone recomputes the challenge, encrypts the challenge with its own key, and then it checks whether it's correct. Very basic thing. Every bank, every ATM card with every smart card essentially performs this function. This is not very deep. The challenge is now we have to look at the system. Here, crypt is not a problem. You have probably an ARM processor which runs at 800 megahertz, and there's probably a few kilobytes of code space left to implement a symmetric cipher. The problem is on the other side. Now you have to equip all batteries with a tiny chip which should be super cheap, right? And then once we started working on that, we discovered most ciphers, in particular the cipher since 95, most ciphers that were developed in the context of the AES process, they all claimed our cipher is hardware efficient, but they're not really optimized for hardware, for a simple reason, because they were optimized for software. People didn't really have this super cheap hardware as a cost statement in their minds, okay? So the problem that we started addressing here, again, it's constructive crypto, how cheap can we make cryptography? And it was a long learning process, I'll talk about the learning process in a minute. Let's first kind of jump ahead, this is fast forward 2 or 3 years. We ended up with Present. There was an international team of researchers. We gave the idea, and we did some of the work. So an example, you want to encrypt the plain text, and you get a ciphertext out. So what I want to show you here, this is a plain block cipher. You can do email encryption with that, right? You can use it in SSL, so there's nothing strange with it. But we wanted it very brutally optimized it for low hardware cost. So one thing that we learned is use pure substitution permutation. Don't do the fancy mixing stuff that AES does. This is one thing. Second thing is super crucial for the costs. Super crucial for the cost is the S boxes. So we have 4-bit S boxes. They are roughly AES has 8x8 S boxes. Our S boxes are about 10 to 20% as few gates as AES, so we better by a factor 5 to 10, just the gate cost. It's a 31-round cipher, and again, SP means you come in with a plain text here, you mix in your round key, and then what you have, something very simple. You have a round of. I'm fighting this here. You have a round of. You have one row of S boxes. You do a bit permutation, and that's it. So you have this really 4x4 tiny S boxes. Each S box is 25 gates. You have 16 of them in a row. You do a bit permutation, and that's it. And you just keep repeating. Is this secure? Of course, by now we have a pretty good idea how to build a secure block cipher, at least an SP cipher. And as I said before, we didn't do that alone. We're kind of chess. My group is soldering iron, right? So we're not real cryptographers. And Lars Knudsen from TU Denmark and Matt Ropshaw from France Telecom research helped us majorly with this. And these are the results here, the resource use, and the metrics that we're using is gate equivalent. So people that have a math or theoretical CS background, this is just 2-input by Boolean operation, 2-input NAND is kind of our metrics, and this we call that GE for gate equivalent. So this is what you see here. If you implement that in a straightforward way, pretty much you see it here. It takes about 1,500 gate equivalents. What are the gate equivalents are being used for? One thing which is a big insight in low-cost cipher design is more than half of that has essentially nothing to do with crypto. It's just storing 64 bits here and 80 bits here at this point. So just storing the state is 55% of the hardware cost. Very interesting. Then the stupid XOR, right, is 1/9 of the cost. right? It's 180 gates or so. It's just the XOR. Again, we have not done real crypto yet, right? And then the real crypto, if you wish, this SP, substitution permutation layer, is less than 1/3 of that, right? So I think this is pretty interesting. In particular, if you want to optimize that cipher, where do you optimize? Well, you're essentially stuck with the state and the key storage. You're probably stuck with the XOR. So the only thing you can play with are these whatever 500 gates or less than 500 gates that's actually used for the crypto part. Very interesting. So for really what this slide tells us, it's very hard to build a secure cipher with 200 gates. This is what this slide shows us here. So now let's look at the result. This is the, and I'm a little bit cheating, it's good to cheat on the result slide. So this is, there have been better implementations by then, but when we did that a few years ago, that was the best AES implementation. So you need about 3,500 gates for a tiny AES implementation, but 1,000 clock cycles. Our standard present implementations, one that I just showed, round parallel, that means it takes 32 clock cycles to finish one present encryption, takes about 1,500 clock cycles. This is, more than a factor 2 here and a factor 30 here. So time area product is a factor 60, 70, 80, something in this neighborhood, which is very good. Which is also factor 70 or so in terms of power consumption, which is sometimes desirable. And of course, at some point we got really competitive and we wanted to look how small can we squeeze present if you're not implementing one round in parallel, but round serial, meaning one round by itself takes 16 cycles, so we call that round serial. So one S box per clock cycle is being computed. And then, with a lot of tricks, took Axel, a few weeks, and we got down to about 1,000 gates here, but there's a German saying, only death is for free. That means we have to pay, and where do we pay? Here, right? This increases by a factor of 16 roughly. So what are the lessons learned? It's present is a smaller cipher, even though there have been a bunch of other proposals actually, which are around that gate count. Sometimes they're a little smaller. As I said before, what I think is very interesting, if you want to store 144-bit of states, it means 80-bit of key and 64-bit of data path, you're stuck with something. Yep.
I'm just wondering how much of the improvement can you attribute to the key size? Like if it is 128-bit present, then I assume it would still be better than AES, but
no, this goes up linearly. This is 48 times 6, so it's 250 gates roughly if you go to 128. Okay. Yeah, it's good question. Yeah, so this is moderate. Yeah, it's moderate. I could say a lot about, okay, I'll come back to that in a minute, Dan. Okay, good question. So again, if you, and of course, that's a good observation here, we're cheating a little bit. This is 80-bit and this is 128. So if you want to have equal security levels, even though I'm not claiming present as trustworthy as AES, you add something between 250 and 300 gates to that. So it's still pretty moderate. What is interesting, both Klefi, and I think the next talk will be about Klefi, is that correct? Yeah. And presence are being ISO standardized, and next year, I think early next year, there will be a new ISO standard which actually has in its title lightweight cryptography, and both ciphers will become part of the ISO standard, and also we won a fairly fancy German security award for that. Maybe addressing one concern of Dan, which is of course absolute valid. He says, you have 80 bits here, but AES has 128-bit. Our counter argument is most of these extremely low-cost applications, you don't need 128-bit security. 128-bit security, in my opinion, is mainly relevant if you have data with a long-term value. You want to encrypt stuff, which is supposed to be secure more than 2 decades, 30, 40 decades. We talk about anti-counterfeiting for printers. You don't worry that the challenge is secure for 40 years. So what I really think is AES is a great cipher. It's very universal, including the security. It has this really great long-term security. And what we say, and part of our argument that we're making is there are many applications where this is somewhat of an overkill in terms of long-term security. There are many applications in embedded space where you don't need data to be secure for several decades. You know, probably 10, 15 years is already much, much longer than the lifetime of the product. Okay, so these were two yin, you know, soft arguments, day arguments in favor, or examples, case studies of embedded security. And now we want to look at the deconstructive side, you know, of breaking stuff. And first, let's look at routers. So what we are looking at are FPGAs. FPGAs are field programmable gate arrays. Before I say what they are, where they're used, super widely used. They're in routers. I don't know whether it's true, but a few years ago, Cisco was the main customer of Xilinx. Xilinx has 60% of the FPGA market worldwide. Many of them ended in Cisco routers. Many consumer products have them. Their automotive products, machinery, and another big customer is military. They are programmable hardware, so they're kind of a mixture between your embedded CPU or your general CPU maybe and a dedicated ASIC. That means at the power up of the device, you can configure the device. When I started doing FPGA crypto, that was in 96, 97, it was very, very hard to get, let's say, full-size RSA running on an FPGA chip. The FPGA chip had, they talk about gate equivalents, that may be a few thousand gate equivalents, but we all know Moore's law. But now the high-end FPGAs, they have millions or 10 of millions of gate equivalents, what means for relatively little money, you know, a few $10 or euros, or maybe less than around 1,000 rupees, you can get programmable hardware with an absurd amount of computing power that you can realize on that, right? So very attractive for many applications. And you don't have to build an ASIC, which is roughly $1 million of startup cost getting an ASIC running. You just go to Xilinx, Altera, go to your favorite electronic retailer and buy a chip for $20. The problem with that being, unlike ASICs, is that it might be very easy to copy a design, a hardware design. If you have an ASIC, complete reverse engineering a 1 million gate ASIC is pretty costly. There are companies that do that, but then we talk again about probably $1 million just to reverse engineer the ASIC. So it's not super attractive. In the FPGA case, it's much easier because, as we will see in a minute, at power up, the FPGA is very virgin. You know, there's little millions of little switches that can be configured. At power up, it reads its entire configuration data in. So there's a configuration file with the typical size of a few million bits, in which completely uniquely defines the functioning of the FPGA. And since FPGAs are standardized, an attacker simply can read out the configuration file and copy then, you know, make a one-to-one copy for a Cisco router, say. So what do the FPGA vendors do? They employ bitstream encryption. How does this work? So what you see here, and I should have probably added a picture of a PC. So this is happening on your PC. That's the design flow. This is all software. You do your FPGA design, and your FPGA design might entail secret keys that you might want to, you know, compile into your design. There might be proprietary algorithms. For instance, at some point I worked with the very high-end consumer electronic audio company, and a lot of their IP, of the intellectual property, was in the filtering algorithms. You know, just the audio signal processing algorithms are very valuable. They don't want the competitor to learn about that. There can be a proprietary IP cores that worth a lot of money. So what your design tools give you is a bit stream. And this bit stream, you know, if your competitor gets this bit stream, he can just make a one-on-one copy of your FPGA function. So what we do instead on your PC, you have a triple DES engine running, you CBC encrypt the bit stream, and now, you know, this reddish box here is the encrypted version of the bit stream. Now we look at this device in the field. This is a router. This is actually an automotive ECU part. You have a PCB board. You have this FPGA, which is SRAM based. And now what happens upon power up, this encrypted EEPROM is being read in. It's being decrypted, and you can see that this is a real decryption. In order to permanently store the key here, it actually needs an external battery. This is one way of recognizing whether your product, the printed circuit board you're looking at, whether it employs bitstream encryption, whether there's a small battery on board, because the small battery has exactly one purpose, typically storing the key here. So now, upon encryption, if you want to initialize your system, you have to copy your encrypted bitstream in here. These keys, obviously, these are 168-bit triple DES keys. They have to be identical. And then upon power up, you can do that. The problem now, the attacker would like to decrypt that, but the attacker doesn't have the key, right? So the typical scenario, and there are many applications that actually use that. So the question is, how do we get the key out? It turns out reading this key out directly through classical chip hardware reverse engineering is a pretty hard task to read that out of some EEPROM cell here on chip. So what we tried instead is side channel analysis. How does this work? So first of all, we view this not as some kind of abstract kind of state machine that, with a program that performs certain function, but we look at it in a more physical sense. And one thing that you notice is that it's actually powered, right? So it's connected to the power supply. And then the idea is that you put in a small resistor, a few ohms here. You measure the power consumption. And then out of the power consumption, this is Amir, the guy who does all the stuff in my group. So out of the power consumption, Amir is hopefully able to extract the crypto key. Once we have the crypto key, we can hopefully decrypt the EEPROM here, right? Running triple DES decryption here. So this is one slide version of side channel attack, so I don't want to go too much into detail. So the first thing you have to do, you have to analyze the cipher. I mean, we all know triple DES. The harder part is you have to do for side channel analysis, you have to predict certain internal values, and that's typically a hard part, in particular if you don't know how the cipher is designed internally. Then a non-trivial part is doing measurements here. This is what you see is our favorite digital oscilloscope here. Getting the measurements right is not easy. Then you have to do some post-processing, aligning, and in particular actually running the DPA attack, differential power analysis. And if things work out, you end up getting the key. So these are very high level, the steps we have to go through. So here you see the measurement setup. I don't know whether you can read that. This actually says Vertex X2 Pro, so one of the high-end Xilinx devices that use triple DES here. This is another view. You can probably, I can also barely see that. Where is it? Oh yeah, here are these are resistors. These are the resistors we put in by hand, right? So actually measure the voltage drop, which is a function of the power consumption. This is signal acquisition here, just to have an idea. This is a high-end digital oscilloscope that we employed here in this case. Took a long time, 6 months later, and actually the hard part is really getting the measurement right. This is very, very hard. So what you see here is a correlation coefficient. This is another detail that I'm omitting here. So essentially what happens here, if this curve goes up here, you have a correlation between a predicted key. That means you have the key value. So this is the key value of the first DES engine. Once you've broken that, you can use this key for predicting the key of the second DES engine. And once you've broken the second DES engine, you can use it for predicting the final DES engine here at this point. So it worked, and you actually see this is the actual power. This is actually timeline, right? In nanoseconds, it's pretty quick because in hardware implementation. But really, at this point, the correlation coefficient converges. That means we do have broken the first round of DES. Here's the second DES implementation and the third DES implementation. So how can we summarize that? This is a really devastating attack. Sometimes we have attacks where you have to admit it might be really hard to do that in a practical setting. Not here, because once you power up, DES is not running one times, but you have you do 50,000 encryptions to encrypt the entire design file. So a single power up, which by itself takes a fraction of a second, immediately gives us 50,000 DES encryptions, which is great. You have to work with averaging here a lot, right? You have to smooth the curve. The actual computation, the signal processing, the actual DPA only takes a few minutes on a modern PC. What is also, which was very interesting for me is, so, okay, we can break triple dash, big whoop. What was not clear, and there were a lot of people saying that, and I was a little bit unsure myself, if you look at the, is it on here? Yeah. So this is a high-end FPGA. This has billions of gates on it. Triple dash is a few thousand gates. So it's around the size of 0.1% in terms of gate count. So you have a lot of other gates that add a lot of noise and a lot of power consumption to it. And it was not clear to us, and probably not clear to a lot of other people, definitely not clear to a lot of people in industry, can you still perform a DPA? And the answer is yes. Yeah, even though your crypto core is only a very tiny, maybe 0.1% of your design, it's still possible to run the attack. This is bullet point number 3 here. Again, less than 1% is the actual crypto. It doesn't matter, really. So what this tells us, these power analysis attacks are super powerful. Once you get the measurement right, don't count on all the other part of the design adding enough noise that you can't do the averaging anymore. It does, and I don't want to, it seems always pretty easy if Christof shows one of these attacks here on 5 slides. Again, this was maybe 1 year of hard work by really smart grad students. But, so this is a counter argument. It's maybe not that easy. But I do think intelligence services can do that. Organized crime, it's a question of money. Organized crime, if they really want to do that, they find somebody who's trained in power analysis or who learns power analysis who wants to do that. What is very scary is, even though there is some experience required, the equipment is very cheap. I mean, we ended up using expensive equipment mainly because we had it. If you have to do it again, you can use this cheap oscilloscope, which I'm going to show in a few minutes, which sells for about $1,000. Okay. The other thing, it's very easy to repeat. If you have a design, you want to have it broken, give it to Amir, be really nice to Amir, give him some money, and he breaks it for you probably in real terms in a few days. He will probably have the matter set up running and can break. So it's very easy to replicate this attack. So what can we do with that? What are the implications here? Well, one thing that we can do is you can reverse engineer the design internal. So for instance, if you have proprietary algorithms, as I mentioned, this high-end audio company that has very fancy in-house developed audio signal processing algorithm, the competitor can extract them. One, which was my original motivation here, my sales spiel for you, was you can clone products now, one-to-one copy. So you don't even have to understand what's happening in the design file. Just, decrypt, make a one-to-one copy, and put it on your own design. You can do what's called in the automotive world chip tuning, so you can start altering the designs. And of course, one really scary thing, in particular if US military, maybe you can introduce Trojan hardware. That means take an encrypted design, extract the triple dash key, you have your raw design, add malicious hardware, does certain things, for instance, some kind of weapon suddenly starts working if it's over Iran, for instance, right? If you get the right GPS coordinates, and suddenly it stopped working, and then you put the altered design back in again, right? This is, I don't know how realistic the threat is, but there are people, particularly in the US, who are worried about Trojan hardware. So they probably, if smart people, smart security people like us sit together, we could probably add a few other potential attacks, extend the threat model here. Okay, now I come to the last case study, which has to do with public transportation, a much more civilian example of security risk related to the embedded space. I like that because it's much more hands-on, it's much closer to our everyday life than Cisco routers, because we're not schlepping Cisco routers around with us typically. But what many of us do, we carry around in our wallets contactless smart cards. What is contactless smart cards? A very rough approximation. So this is an RFID chip together with some symmetric crypto running on it. What you see here, a whole bunch of real-world examples. This is the Oyster card, which I believe is used in London public transportation. This is a German Reisepass, a German passport, which was one of the first ones that got an ID chip on it, but more and more countries are adding the same technology, that the certain type of Visa cards are RFID equipped, and there are many more examples. What do we do with that? As I just said here, you can use it either for payment, you know, for in the Visa card, you can use it as a passport or you can use it for public transportation. And there will be more and more applications like that. If you wish, NFC technology in a smartphone is kind of an attempt to replace some of these applications from dedicated devices, you know, such as a Visa card, but making payments with your mobile phone. And if you follow all the hype about NFC, you see this is hot. You know, this whole area is hot. So how secure is that? Well, one possible attack is, of course, breaking these devices by, again, extracting the secret crypto key here. You know, once you can start extracting the keys, you can start issuing a falsified passport. You can, you know, eat food for free. This is what we did in our cafeteria at our university, a large state public university. And we were able to attack our student card, and this student card doubles as a payment card. So you can upload money and then get food. And we did that, and we ate for free for 1 week, which was very nice. We did talk to the people who run our cafeteria. They didn't believe that we could do the attack, so we did the attack, and we ate for free. What's that? Right, exactly. Yeah. Well, they do sell excellent German chocolate, so which I brought for my kids home. Oh, whatever. So let's look at the brief history of contactless smart cards. And that's actually not a very glorious history. They started in the 1990s, and even around 2000, it's almost very hard to believe if you're a cryptographer. The first generations that were sold, you know, up till even sold now, but definitely, you know, beginning of the decade, there were a lot of proprietary ciphers. The short keys, you know, many of them only had 48-bit keys. And to make things even worse, usually you didn't have to brute force that. You could use classical attacks, you know, in particular mathematical analytical attacks, break things such as malware. So it was really bad technology was in there. So what happened in the last 2 years, people like Carsten Knoll started to reverse engineer these devices, and it showed they're really crap cryptographically. So the company did react, so there's some learning involved, some learning curve. And they came up with new generation of cards. This is the MyFair Deathfire. This is the MyFair Plus, which is AES equipped. Logic Advant, which has AES on it, and Infineon added one, it's SmartMX. And all of them use typically either triple DES or AES, so these are very secure crypto algorithms. You know, we cannot break them with either brute force or analytically. So again, the question, the open question is, what about implementation attacks? Similar to the situation we had with the FPGA. What we looked at is Deathfire. Why Deathfire? Probably, we don't have hard sales number, but our feeling is this is the most widely used contactless chip card. It's actually with strong algorithms. It's out in the wild. It does use triple DES. We do know firsthand this is used in Prague. The Prague card we broke. The San Francisco card we are breaking. David is breaking as we speak. One thing that is harder now, you cannot, now we want to measure the power consumption, and again the hypothesis is once you have the power consumption is somehow related to the crypto key that's being processed. Now one problem with the contactless cards is they're contactless, so it's not that easy to measure the power because there's no direct power supply. The power is coming through the magnetic fields. This is how it works on the kind of on a physical layer. If you can do that, well, it's probably a threat, and as soon as payment is involved, this is maybe even more fun to do than cloning Cisco routers, right? I would never clone a Cisco router. It was fun to eat in our cafeteria for free. You know what I'm saying? I mean, adding money is for many people interesting. It might not be for that many people interesting to build your own router. So it seems like a fun project. So this is a measurement setup. The main players is the PC here. You know, it's kind of what you're using as an attacker. And this is, I should probably use a different picture. This is a contact smart card. So this is a target. I should have used like a Visa card or the San Francisco card here at this point. So one thing that we built, because it is pretty, you have to communicate with, of course, you have to communicate with the card, you know, trigger the card. Sometimes you need very accurate time measurements. So what we've been doing for a long time, we built our own equipment here. So this is a reader device, which is freely programmable. So this is mainly what Timo did over the last 2 years, further improving this. This is a small microprocessor who can really control that on the protocol and sub-protocol level, the communication. So this is very useful. The other thing is this oscilloscope. I mentioned that before. So this is not this big box, you know, for 25,000 euros. This is this 990 euro oscilloscope. So it's around $1,000 here. This is called the USB scope, which is, you know, which normally at universities you can afford. And this is, you know, you can sample up to 1 gigabit per second. So this is sufficient. And there's some other things you have to do here. What's it? Oh yeah, and this, oh, so this is a good question. So this is a standard electromagnetic probe. So we're not touching the card. So, you know, we're measuring with 1-2 millimeters away from the IC integrated circuit. Good question. Yeah. So here is a good point. I don't want to go too much in detail, but it's a good point. So the problem is why this is considerably harder than the case of the FPGA. This is not really touching, you know. This might be touching, but not in kind of an electric way. You know, you're really close, up to 1 or 2 millimeters. You want to capture the weak magnetic field that comes from this lightweight, low-energy chip. At the same time, you have the reader, you know, this green one's really strong EM field that's supplying this chip with energy. So this is why we actually have to do analog pre-processing, and this is hard. However, if you spend enough time in it, you end up with this trace. I mean, this took a year or so to come up with this measurement. So what do we see here? We do other stuff is happening. Then what we really did is we have the plain text because we can control the plain text. So what we did actually, we did correlate that. We kind of did a DPA on the plain text just to see where the plain text is still present. It turns out up to this point here, the plain text is there. And eventually, of course, we know the ciphertext because ciphertext comes back from the card. And again, we correlate it with the ciphertext, so we know all what's being processed here. These are bytes of the ciphertext up to here. So what we know in between, triple des must be happening. And now, you know, you don't have to do a world-class cryptographer to say, well, you know, this could be des, this could be des, and this could be des. And of course, triple des is happening here, right? So, and once you have that, stuff becomes easy. You know, this is now more or less textbook DPA at this point here. And this is an example of SBox 1 of the first DES implementation. Was a good remark. You see the number of traces. Before in the FPGA cases, we had relatively strong cases, traces, and we need 50,000 measurements. Here we have 150,000 measurements, and this is the best case, actually. When we started, we were in the neighborhood of 750,000, so 750,000 traces we need for averaging because the signal was so weak. And again, what you see here, similar to before, you see, you know, this is a correlation coefficient. That means at this point, we have the 6 key bits that are going into SBox S1, and then you have to do this with SBox 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8 of the first DES implementation. You know, this is, and again, you see the different timelines here. Okay. So what are the conclusions? I just mentioned that. So you need many more traces. I think that's the best thing that we can do for all 3 DES implementation, 250,000 traces. This takes a few hours, and it also needs, you know, whatever, 1 terabyte of hard disk to store the power traces. It is interesting that low-cost equipment is possible, and also the opportunities for optimization. Right now, you know, this is David's PhD. He's playing around with employing template attacks where you can do certain pre-computations. What we think this is a high threat for real-world payment system. Again, we attacked our system in our university that's used for payment as a cafeteria. It's completely broken. They have a really bad back-end system, a very bad system design that I'm not talking about here at this point. We actually had if you're interested in on kind of the system design issues, we had a financial cryptography paper 2010 on that. So this actually talks the attack of our cafeteria card, which is interesting in itself. Okay, so now I'm done with the technical stuff. I just have one final transparencies. First of all, I want to coming back to the catchy title of my talk. Again, I was only looking for something to tie all the things together under one theme, which makes a nice title for my talk. Once I started making the slides, I realized there's more to it than I thought, because this is the definition of yin-yang. And what are the two core statements here? Well, you have seemingly contrary forces, and they give rise to each other. That means you have things that don't seem to fit to each other, that work against this, but then together they give rise to something good, to something better, which is really close to cryptography and cryptanalysis that we all know, right? I mean, we all grew up with that. And when I teach crypto, I have 150 freshmen in my crypto class. First of all, it takes me like 10 minutes to tell them, well, cryptanalysis is good. This is an important part of crypto. This is not organized crimes or NSA is doing cryptanalysis. These are researchers, right? And I think this is pretty nicely summarized by this yin-yang concept. And I think this is one question: why does the crypto community never talk about yin-yang as some kind of Eastern philosophical concept of crypto? I like that. It was kind of an eye-opener to me. And also, when I talk to journalists about these hacks, and sometimes they ask, well, you're in a state university, you're a civil servant, Professor Paar, why do you hack other people's stuff, And I said, well, it's ethical hacking, and maybe just it becomes easier if I can refer to yin-yang and say this is a 2,000-year-old Chinese concept. I don't know, as they listen to that. Okay, so we are not alone with this stuff. There are many people doing that, and these are maybe 3 workshops that I really like and that all deal with embedded security in one way or the other in chronological order. RFID-Sec, I think that will be RFID-Sec number 8, which deals with all issues of security, including lightweight crypto, physical attacks, and a lot of protocol stuff that I haven't talked about because we're not doing that, which will be held in Nijmegen in Holland, which is close to the German-Dutch border. CHES, of course, our flagship conference of the embedded security community, which will be held in Leuven in Belgium, outside Brussels, very nice town. Ingrid Verberwede and Laila will be the key people there. And then a more niche workshop is ESCA, which will be ESCA number 10 next year. And actually, again, Ross was the keynote speaker of the very first ESCA in Cologne. That will be held for the 10th time. It's also a very interesting workshop only dedicated to car security. And my last slide is advertisement for my book. Some of you saw the flyer outside. Maybe the most important part of the book is, first of all, if you want to buy it, don't take the flyer I just learned. Go to flipkart.com. Flipkart is a very popular Indian book buying site, and it's probably easier than to order that with my flyer. The second important thing is if you want to learn crypto, or your students want to learn crypto, I videotaped in English, luckily, my whole 2-semester sequence, so the 25 lecture courses of crypto, which really...
We are using some new concept of payment. So what do you think
NFC is a good point. So NFC, which I just learned actually the hard way, NFC is closely coupled to the security chips that NXP builds. And I should have said, and it's a great question. So here's what's very important message for you guys. So we can break a lot of stuff using side channel attacks. This is all stuff. This is not CC evaluated, common criteria evaluated. So also what I did not say is, for instance, that we can break the German passport or any other of the passports. So I think there's a way today, if you add much stronger countermeasures to it and you add a lot of obscurity to it, that it will be very, very hard for people like us to break that. And the NFC chips, I'm almost certain, have the state-of-the-art countermeasures built in, so we cannot break them. Not yet. And this is an open research question that we are asking ourselves and a few other research groups internationally. What about this really common criteria evaluated high-end smart cards or high-end payment cards or high-end ID cards? Can we break them? Right now, we cannot do that. We think there's a chance, but I'm really, my PhD students, they think we have good chances. I'm probably more conservative with that. I think mainly obscurity can make this very hard for you. Yeah. That's a good point. So his question is really, you can break all of that. These are open algorithms. What about proprietary algorithms? And we know with MyFair it was a complete disaster. We all know this kind of handmade, electrical engineers like me making crypto algorithms, and they all suck. They're really bad. So the question is, what about AES with an altered key schedule, right? Things like that. I know it's the antichrist in the crypto community. I don't think it's a bad idea. I think obscurity can be very, very helpful. I think obscurity does have a role in the real world. Yeah. If you talk to the paid TV people who really know what they're doing, they rely on good crypto and in good obscurity. Yeah.
What is about Java cards? You are talking about the 9-bit 48-bit cards.
Yeah. Yeah.
Java card, we can implement our own authentication.
Right. It's in. So the big lesson learned from the last 30 minutes that I presented here. If you have Java cards, any other hardware device without countermeasures can be broken. So how difficult it is?
Java cards, how much it is secure?
It's not secure. I mean, all the stuff without explicit countermeasures is easy to break. And I didn't mention that actually the last example, the payment cards, they already had some countermeasures built in, so we could overcome them, but not like the gate level, the hardware level ones. So Java cards can be broken, and we haven't really looked at it. Well, if you implement your own algorithm, then it's really the question is, this can also be broken when it's reverse engineered, but now you have this additional hurdle of reverse engineering, and this is really what it boils down to. How hard is it to reverse engineer secret algorithm? Yeah. Any other questions?
I actually have a little question.
Sure.
You happen to know if your book is available from bookstores here, particularly like Esquire
or like as a cheap version? Yeah, I haven't heard from Springer. I don't know. I'm probably afraid not. So if you really don't want to buy the books, they're all kind of Chinese websites where you can download it illegally. So this is actually a very interesting side story. So this came out in December 2009, and of course I was Googling, who is using my book, and I think after Springer and Amazon, the next website that came up was some kind of illegal download website. I don't know who does it. I mean, who's scanning in my book, or do they get that from Springer? How does this market operate? I don't know. So it's much cheaper than buying it online. Okay. Yeah.
All right, more questions?
I'm available in the break, right? We have a break now? Yeah.
Okay, it's time for tea. Let's thank the speaker again.
Okay, thank you very much. This is very nice. Thank you.